So, welcome, EDU 537 leaders, followers, thinkers, readers, writers, and just all around good people and fun people to work with in this particular course. So, today we're going to talk a little bit about infinite power and finite power, and also influence. So, how you as leaders can exert some influence in different situations in order to extend your power. Rather, I was going to say establish your power, but as we'll see through the PowerPoint, power is really something that we have and something that everybody has. And the real issue for us is acknowledging our own power and understanding our own power, as well as acknowledging and understanding the power in others to kind of keep those relationships intact and working well. So I've given you some things to look at. I gave you a chapter out of the Broom and Klein book that really talks about influence primarily and the sort of the different channels of influence. And hopefully that'll invite you to think a little bit about how influence works in different organizations and also for you at your school and in your career. But in this particular PowerPoint that I'm going to show you, we're going to look at influence, but we're also going to look at some of the sources of power, where they come from, what the definitions of power are, and how we can use and maintain a power that is really maintained on its own, because we are powerful individuals regardless, as we'll see in just a moment. So what I want to do is kind of walk us through this PowerPoint on finite and infinite power and influence. So first of all, let's define what we mean. So finite power is really based on this idea of a zero-sum game. It's really about control. It's somewhat about coercion. It's about exploiting people. It's having your own goals and mastering your own goals, really to the detriment of other people. And of course, you see Kurt Lewin here, who first posited the idea that you could be in a democracy and you could be in an authoritarian form of leadership. And the authoritarian form of leadership is really hard to get rid of once it's in your mindset, while the democratic form of leadership needs to be learned and has to be learned over and over again in order for it to succeed. So really, finite power sits better in that control sort of authoritarian comparison between those two. Infinite power, on the other hand, is creative, and it really is life affirming. So we're really looking at kind of the power that we have, the power that other people have, recognizing and acknowledging that everybody has this power, that diversity creates power, that knowing a system creates power, that we have power from all sorts of different sources that we can use essentially for good, and that we can also encourage other people to use their power as well. So the idea of finite and infinite power, on the one hand, you have power as a zero-sum game, which means that if I gain power, you lose power, you gain power, I lose power. And really, the infinite power postulates the fact that that's not really the way it works. Our power is really never lost. And we really need to understand ourselves as individuals, as leaders, in order to maximize that power. So again, we come back to that idea of authenticity and knowing who we are. So Michael Broom, who is at least one author on the WPD that we're looking at for this week, had this equation for power, which is that your vision and your energy divided by whatever resistance there is to that vision and that energy really equals power. And that numerator is always going to stay much higher and much greater than that denominator of resistance, no matter what, because our power and our vision stays with us, and it's something that we have. So power can't be bargained away, and it remains for both of us, you and me. And knowing that you and I are both powerful can help us work together and get us to where we want to be as a team and as an organization. So, of course, Shackleton casts a very vivid and a very large shadow across this course at this point, because we've read about a man who is fundamentally a powerful individual in many ways, but someone who recognizes his power and also encourages other people's power. We saw that in reading Shackleton's Way. So I think what Shackleton exhibits for us is this idea of infinite power. And here's another comparison between the two. Power is abundant. It's always there. It's in the universe. It's physical energy, it's emotional energy, it's intellectual energy. We have those things. We know we really saw clearly in Shackleton's Way that winning was not what Shackleton was about. Winning, and he didn't have this idea that losing equals failure. He had the idea that goals are going to change, that winning meant keeping people safe and being safe. So his goals changed, but ultimately his focus on people, as we read, was the real difference in his leadership. And he focused on every single one of his crew members individually and as a whole. And differences between Shackleton and his crew members actually determined their level of success and gave them the sources of learning about their experience. So the rules that Shackleton imposed were flexible and adaptable. He wasn't kind of hardcore. If you broke the rules, we would lose. He did use reward and punishment in order to make clear that rules in some cases and in some ways needed to be followed. But it wasn't as though breaking the rules meant that you were no longer part of the group or that you were somehow less. So these rules are flexible and adaptable. And finally, infinite power, because it's based on the quality of the person and the quality of the relationship, encourages stability and, for Shackleton, safety. Whereas, so people grew, people learned in the experience, as wild as that sounds in some ways, because it was about survival, but they definitely came away understanding more about themselves and more about who Shackleton was in the process. I'm going to have to keep shifting myself around here. I got to find a good spot for my little face on the screen. So, wow, types of power, really, those kinds of conversations haven't changed much over the years. And I've also dropped in a PowerPoint for you on French and Raven's idea of power. And really, this goes back to 1950, and not much has changed since. So this was really a powerful piece of research and a powerful article, actually, that French and Raven wrote in 1950, or a book that French and Raven wrote, rather, about types of power. So you have these 5 different types of power: expert, referent, legitimate, reward, and coercive power. And we all have these we all have this power in us to greater or lesser extents. As you can see, expert and referent power engage people and create commitment. So those are the 2 kinds of power that we can exert that have the most positive kind of benefit. We are becoming experts as teachers. We are becoming experts as literacy professionals. We could probably at this point step into a meeting and talk a little bit to what we know and have learned of literacy, and what we know and have learned of how teaching works and working with youngsters is part of our toolbox, right? The kinds of strategies that we've had. You've written about these sorts of things. Your posts and your reflections all very clearly situate you as people who are developing expertise. And you have referent power. Some of your students look up to you. Some of your students want to be like you because of your kindness, because of your generosity, because you're willing to get on the carpet and sit down and play with them and work with them as as partners in the learning process. So referent power is really about that partnership and about extending who you are, your character, to other people, and having other people sort of see that, acknowledge it, and want to be like it. Legitimate power is the power of position. You have a position as a teacher. Your principal has a position as a principal. Your literacy specialist has a position as a literacy specialist. So there's some power that's accorded from the fact that you are in a position. You've been hired to do a certain thing. And then there is reward power. If you behave in a certain way, you get a reward as a result. And of course, we use this as teachers. I like the idea that my daughter brings up, that reward should always be about choice. It shouldn't be, I'm going to give you a piece of candy for behaving. It's going to be, okay, you've got a choice of reading this book or going over to the computer because you did a really nice job in your group work. So it extends to our thinking about what kinds of rewards we want to provide, and how much compliance we're going to demand, because compliance can also kind of wear people down after a while. I comply. Do I have to comply anymore? When do I get to commit? When do I get to be part of the group and exert my own power in this case? So I like that my daughter preserves that sense of power in the choices that she gives in her classroom. And finally, there's coercive power, which just leads to resistance. And this is exerting your power, exerting your control over another person. And that's where the real resistance happens. And of course, you're seeing this in some of your organizations. It is a way in which different leaders function, for sure. So with that power comes influence. All those different kinds of power exert a certain kind of influence. You can look at those last three the types of power and see that they really kind of sit on the least effective, can sit on the least effective range. Using things like transaction to exchange an offer. If I give you this, you give me that. Ingratiation, using flattery. Personal appeal, using relationships and common ground and rapport to get what you want. Coercion, pressure, we've seen that already. That results in resistance. We can also create alliances, but of course, alliances on the one hand leave other people out, so that's not always the most effective way to go. And finally, we just exert our power or our authority as we're given it on other people. These are not effective modes of influence. More effective is the idea of working out a logical argument and creating that sense of persuasion that if we go in this direction, these are going to be the benefits and these are going to be the outcomes. So being able to speak about that much the same way that Shackleton did, always keeping the goal transparent, always giving the men some idea of what the logic is and why we're doing what we're doing. Inspiration, just the idea that your vision, your sense of what could happen and how good the outcomes can be communicated, and to set an example of somebody who has enthusiasm and has energy. Consultation, so gathering information from other people, recognizing other people's expertise, and enlivening and empowering their ability to provide you that expertise and speak to that expertise. And finally, there is collaboration, where you're offering support and resources for that commitment that often comes from referent and expert power, but really looking at people as equals and looking at yourself as equal in the process. And just here's a list of different tactics to influence, increase influence. And this happens outside of team meetings and in the day to day. And I'm sure many of you, all of you, are probably doing this in the schools. Again, I've read your WDPs, I've read your reflections, and you do this sort of stuff on a regular basis by offering other teachers assistance, by being a resource for other teachers, by trying to help to resolve conflicts. I know you do this in your classrooms on a regular basis. Persuading your teachers to think differently. I can think about several of you who've talked about really managing paraprofessionals, for example, in a way that would develop a better outcome, and kind of using the logic and the idea behind what you're trying to do to influence people to do what seems to be right. Going above and beyond in terms of collaboration and sort of taking over for people and helping to support one another, and likewise showing interest in one another. You've got those professional development opportunities where you stop in and listen to your fellow teachers. So you're encouraging them to see themselves also as powerful, and you're interested in what they're doing and what they're thinking. So what kinds of things are needed for positive power and positive influence? Well, first of all, as we said on day one, and as we saw on day one, you've got to be authentic. You've got to know who you are. You've got to know your limits, and you've also got to know your strengths. So being conscious of yourself is an important first step. And being that authentic person before you think about becoming a leader is a critical factor in exerting positive power and positive influence. Learning from differences, from different points of view, from different types of people. So being open to different experiences and modeling that particular perspective and that point of view. You've got to know your system. You've got to know the players. You've got to know what kinds of threats there are to the system, external and internal. We've talked a little bit about this already. State education department can be an external threat. Well, what do we do? How do we understand how that system works? And in the process, fixing relationships, working on relationships with people within that system. Always getting sound and current data. So what is the system and what is the data showing us right now? What's important here is we can't make assumptions about other people. We shouldn't even make assumptions about ourselves. We should really kind of look at ourselves objectively and look at the circumstances objectively and not make assumptions, but build knowledge out of what the current situation is like. And finally, strong support within the organization. You're building that through your enthusiasm, through your vision, through your sense of positivity and creating good relationships with people. So you're building toward that particular vision of yourself. And here are a handful of the benefits of that positive power and positive influence. Getting more resources, looking at removing some of the politics that exists in different organizations, having transparency and having a free flow of information, kind of pushing against the kind of power that comes from authority or that comes from coercion, because you're building a mindset among you and your followers that encourages this sense of your own power, the sense of your own achievement, your own accomplishment, and your own ability to create change. So last of all, we're looking at this idea of personal empowerment and group empowerment and what that is. So we go back to Michael Broom, who basically talks about intellectual energy, emotional energy, and physical energy. And this is how these build on one another. And you feel this, you have this, you know this. Your teachers, you have a tremendous amount of intellectual capacity to be able to work with students and help them learn. So you make a choice to be a teacher. You make a choice to empower your students, and that creates your focus. You are student-centered. You are dedicated to students, and above all else, in your teams, in your school, in your classroom, your students come first. Those are the people like Shackleton whom you want to acknowledge as the most important people in the relationship. That intellectual energy then can kind of transfer with focus to emotional energy that creates motivation. So you've got that vision, you've got that outcome that the group has decided on, you've got that place you're going to, and everybody's motivated in that regard. And finally, there's just the physical energy of the day to day. Yeah, you and I, and me too, believe it or not, get exhausted at the end of the day, and we figure, how can we keep going? And yet we have that physical energy that allows us to get up in the morning, come back, you walk into the classroom, boom, it's great because here's another opportunity to create learning, to have fun, thinking and learning about different things. So there's a lot of physical energy that comes just from that emotional and intellectual pursuit. You have that plus the motivation that comes from emotional energy leads you to action, and that decision making, that action is really where we want to be on a regular basis anyway, in our schools, in our classrooms, and on our teams. Finally, group empowerment comes from using the full range of internal and external resources. That's not just materials, but that's people too, and also stretching that authentic self. And when you discover your power, no one can take that away from you. And so much power generates from that student-centered idea. So that's where I'm going to leave us for today. Hopefully I haven't taken up too much of your time whenever you're taking a look at this recording, although I do like coming on and just thinking about you as I talk about some of these issues. And I think some of the same things are starting to happen in my hair for today that were happening major in class. So anyway, take care. Thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed this week. I hope you're thinking about power, thinking about influence, and how you can generate both those things, and even not even generate, but acknowledge them in yourself, because you have them. You have that intellectual, emotional, and physical energy that makes you a great teacher and that makes you a great leader. So I'm going to leave you there. Thanks very much. And we will be seeing one another again in week 13. And until then, I'm going to say goodbye. And I hope everything goes well. I hope you're doing well. Enjoy yourselves. Goodbye.